continue to grace us with patience for our country, our state, and here in Pataskala. We thank you for the past few days of heavenly weather. It was certainly enjoyed and much needed by businesses and residents alike. We ask, Lord, that you keep us healthy, keep those at high risk healthy, give strength to those recovering, and give peace to those who have passed, and likewise to their families. Lord, look over, bless, and keep an eye on our high school seniors. Bring some extra special happiness to their lives so they may handle the disappointment with patience and understanding. And we ask for all of this in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Kathy, roll call, please.
Carter.
Here.
Walther.
Here.
Epperson.
Here.
Barstow.
Here.
Hampshire.
Here.
Gaelic.
Here.
Lee.
Okay, we have a quorum present. First thing on the agenda tonight, citizens' comments. Mr. City Administrator, have we received any statements or anything from the public?
No, not that I've
Okay.
seen.
All right, this introduction, discussion, and approval of consent agenda matters.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Barstow. Seconded by Mr. Epperson. Discussion and roll.
Carter.
Yes.
Walther.
Yes.
Epperson.
Yes.
Barstow.
Yes.
Hampshire.
Yes.
Gaelic.
Yes. Okay, consent agenda passes. On the reports, the only thing I have is Bruce isn't with us tonight. I asked him if he had any issues, and there are none. We are exploring, this time of the year, we usually have a drug take-back, which is, even with all of the restrictions in place, we could have a drug take-back here at the new station. So we're looking into that and exploring that possibility, since it's always a drive up and drop off, so we're working on that. Don't forget to fill out your census. It took me 5 minutes. And I think that's just about it. Mr. Barstow, what do you got?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder on the Charter Review Commission, I know I've talked to a couple of council members that already have their picks. When you get your pick, just let me know, but please let Kathy know. Basically, what she needs is cell phone and email information so she can give that person, then we'll pass it by motion once we have everybody. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Mr.
You want us,
Mr. Walter?
do you want us to send it directly to Kathy, or do you would copy Kathy? How do you want us to
Send
send
it,
it?
just send it to Kathy and CC me, or send it to me and CC Kathy, whatever.
Maybe it's to Kathy, but CC.
That's fine, so we know, we keep track. Yeah, that's fine, thanks, Andy.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Barstow? Mr. Zatz?
I have nothing tonight, thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. City Administrator Timothy O'Hickens.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple items tonight. The first one is I wanted to say that the pole removal from the electric poles on Main Street was completed last week. There was one pole left that still had a phone line on it, so AEP would not remove the phone line, the pole with the phone line, but they are working on getting to that. We also have a contract in place for repair of damaged sidewalks that happened as a result of the project, and also with Quality Yard and Home Maintenance to restore the yards which were also damaged as a result of the project. I'll be entering into the sidewalk contract is already let. I'll need to confirm the contract and sign it with Mr. Nestor from Quality. And then we'll move forward with that as soon as possible. I wanted to make sure that council did see my letter from last week where I was extending the emergency, or basically thanking Mr. Chirac for his time in office, but in office in this position, but also that I was extending it. Part of that letter also said that I was looking at a resumption on May 11th. I still think that is where I will fall, but there are some things that might make me go to the 18th, and I want council to know about that. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about resuming normal office activities. I don't think we have had a significant fall off in the time. I think the public is still being served. And part of my logic about looking at the 11th, coming back on the 11th, was we might be able to see if there were detrimental effects of Ohio opening up this week. I don't think that there'll be enough time to do that, to tell, based on what I'm hearing from the governor and Dr. Acton. So we may consider the 18th, but right now it's still the 11th. And I would look for some guidance, some more stricter guidance, whenever that happens, from me to staff about social distancing and masking. That probably has to go with opening back up. Finally, I won't steal the thunder too much, but I will say that Jamie and I have met with the directors, and we know that there is a possible budgetary shortfall coming. We're in the very early stages of being able to gauge it. Like I said, I'll let Mr. Nicholson talk about that. But we are, our initial request of the directors is to try to identify up to 10% right off the bat in discretionary spending, things that they might identify that they could cut. I don't know if that is over. I personally think it's kind of right down the middle, but I want council to be aware that Mr. Nicholson and I have talked to the directors about that. And like I said, I'll let Jamie talk about exactly what we are seeing in tax revenue. And other than that, I think that's enough for now. I don't know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer.
Anything for Tim? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Nicholson?
Thank you, Mayor, and members of council. We received the advance distribution from Rita for the month of April, and it was down about $70,000 or 11.34% from this point a year ago. It's hard to tell, obviously, 1 point does not make a trend line. So we're going to be around the 15th of the month. We'll get our mid-month, what they call the settlement. So they work through everything, and that's all the collections for the month at that point. So we're kind of tracking maybe a little better than I was hoping, but I still am cautious because the other shoe hasn't yet fallen. A lot of the, I don't know how much of this is a delay. In other words, people who normally would have filed and paid on April 15th are now permitted to file and pay it by July 15th. So I don't know how much of this reduction is just that, or it's actually lost revenues. So, again, watching it very closely and trying to keep spending to essentials at this point to try to maximize fund balance. And that's where we are with that. Happy to answer any questions if you guys have any questions before I hit the next topic. Okay.
I have a question. Go ahead. Jamie, I just want a question. You said that the revenues from the first part of April were down about 11% from last year. Is that 11% over the first 3.5 months, or is that just comparing April of this year to April of last year down?
That's purely the advanced settlement or advanced distribution from the first distribution in 2019 to the first distribution in the month of May for 2020. So it's a point-to-point comparison.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Our revenues were actually trending up through April ahead of forecast. So, but for coronavirus, this would be a wonderful year for us, I think. So, hopefully we can get that back on track.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. What's next?
The next item I just wanted to kind of highlight, sorry? Okay, thought I heard, hold on. The next item I have is, I wanted to share, and I think I put it in my report, Moody's did their annual, what they call their intelligence report. Sounds very James Bondish, but it's basically them reaching out to me and having a conversation, looking at our financial reports, our CAFR, and performance of budget and the like. And so basically, we were rated a AA3, which is right in the middle of most municipal government. It's an investment grade. It is a good grade. You know, there's AA3, AA2, AA1, and AAA. So, you know, we have room for improvement. But given the circumstance of what's going on right now, I'm pleased to report that they maintained our AA3 rating, and they highlighted our reserves and our ability to weather these kinds of situations. So kudos to all involved, council for establishing the policy, directors for complying with that and working with us to maintain the balance, because that has enabled us to maintain our rating, which, you know, as of today, we're not going to go into the market for any kind of financing, but, you know, never say never. And if we do want to go out, we want to be as highly rated as we can be to save on interest expense. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that for my report, that I was very pleased that their wisdom they saw to keep us maintain their current rating. So I think that's great news. And that's all I have.
Anything for Jamie?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Jamie, that's good news, thanks. And I just want to say publicly that this situation that we're in right now is the reason that council has fund balances that are maintained so that we can weather any storm. We don't know what's going to happen over the summer into the fall, who knows? But those folks around town who complain about us not spending and having these big balances, this is why we have, not big balances, but this is why we have modest balances in these funds so we can maintain operations. If we come May and our revenues are down 25% or 30%, we're not going to have to cut services because we maintain good fiscal planning, and I think that the Moody's report shows that. So congratulations, Jamie, and council members who support that can kind of pat themselves on the back a little bit. Thanks.
Anything else for Jamie? All right, Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. Start off with a resolution 2020 report of Bureau was for Kirk Brothers to do the construction of the wastewater plant upgrade process. So we got 5 bids received. Kirk Brothers was the lowest and the only one that was awardable, getting 10% of the estimate. They came in at $1,183,000. This resolution, there is language in there to make passing of this resolution before we can go into contract with Kirk Brothers. It is contingent upon receiving that construction loan that the EPA has been reviewing for quite some time now. I do have a little bit of an update on that process. Nothing is finalized yet because they need the resolution authorizing this bid, but all of the satellite paperwork that goes with that is being finalized and sent across to me. So all signs are pointing towards us still making the May 28th award date. And just as a frame of reference, when this whole thing started, we were supposed to have an October of 2019 award date. So it has taken a little bit extra time to get done. But that is where we're at with the upgrade process. We did do the spring application of the biosolids. We used AgroSludge for that process. It took 2 days. They were in on a Wednesday, April 22nd, and Saturday, April 25th, and moved 483.5 wet tons of product up to the field, applied it, and did the required paperwork for that. So our bins are empty again, and we're right back to starting to fill them up, get ready for the fall application process. A quick update on the I&I study. GPD Group did come out and install 2 rain gauges and 6 flow meters in our system, so that we can begin to monitor the amount of iodine getting into the system and help build that model to complete that requirement of our discharge permit. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the OWEA Safety Certification and Safety Award. The certification is, there's no limit on who they can give those, how many they can give out. But the city of Pasco received one last year for the collection system and one for the wastewater treatment plant. This year, we again received the safety certificate for the collection system, but we won the safety award for the treatment plant. They break those down into size of employees, so from 1 to 9, from 10 to 20, and then 20 plus. One goes out to the state, and Pataskala was selected for the 1 to 9 wastewater treatment plant. So it's kind of a big deal. It's a prestigious award in the industry, and just want to say I'm proud of what the guys do out there. They put safety first. Our safety program is kind of a big deal to us. We have monthly safety meetings to go over everything, and it's paying off both in safety and in recognition from our peers. So outside of that, I don't have anything. Be happy to answer any questions. However, I would say that it looks like the microphone is turned off in the council chambers for the director's laptop.
Mr. Hicken was the last one to touch it.
Can you hear us?
I cannot hear you.
The answer is no. Not at all.
It says it's on.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you, yes.
Congratulations, Chris.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you. I'm pretty proud of the guys for getting that, and like I said before, getting the certificate we've done in the past, and I was proud about that. But getting the safety award is the next step up, so kind of a big deal.
So did all this happen while you were in your other position?
Yes, so I can't take any credit for any of it.
Anything for Chris? Yes, Andy.
I got a couple questions. Chris, on the bid for the phosphorus reduction project, being that it's $105,000 over the estimate, have you been able to look at that and give us any kind of idea? You've done some calculations of what would be outside of the loan repayment, or the 0% loan? That was
So we have, I'm sorry, yeah, we did go over some of the preliminary paperwork while they were finalizing their draft. It looks like the loan itself was, including the design and everything, was for $1.5 million. The average interest rate, when they take the amount that's covered 0% and the amount that's covered at their standard rate, which is less than 1%, the average for the entire loan is a 0.15% interest rate, and it equates to about $8,000 worth of interest over the course of the whole loan. I hope that helps.
Yep, that's what I was looking for. Thanks. I did have one of those questions. Sure. On the solids, on the spreading in the fields, you had said that we had about a 25% increase from last year. Is that correct? A 20% increase in
Yes.
tonnage?
Yeah.
And in your report, you said that's because it was a month late in getting out to the fields. So you felt that you had produced, we had obviously received more sludge. Did you see any improvement with the presses? We had put in new presses last year so that the sludge would be drier, obviously less water, less weight. What, can you give us any update on that? Did you see any improvement from that?
Yeah, I have. So last year we averaged around 11.5 to 12% solids. This year we were up to 13.5% average in solids, which doesn't seem like a big jump until you're talking about almost 500 tons, and then it adds up quite a bit. The big improvement with the press is the speed that it can put out that same product and the amount of polymer that it uses. So we are using about a third of the polymer that we used previously. So previously we'd spend around $33,000 a year just on polymer to get the product to solidify and make it where we can press it out. This last year we used just under $10,000 for the whole year. So the speed and the polymer use are the huge improvements, and we also see drier product as well.
You also, Chris, just we had talked about in the committee that you're seeing more usage, both from the water side of it.
Yes.
With people being home, are you seeing more material, as some would say?
Yes, they never stop producing, and the more they're at home in our city, the more we get to see, yes.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other questions for Chris? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Haynes?
Thank you, Mayor. First thing tonight, the resolution 2020-041, that's for the Licking County Health Department for mosquito spraying, the same as we've done for the past few years. That's passed, we'll be planning to do 3 sprays, one before Memorial Day, one before 4th of July, and one before Labor Day. Next item is Town Street. Happy to report that we're setting the last manhole. They're getting that excavated today. We've been ready to connect to the existing pipe, so we should be done with pumping, and the project should be wrapped up here within the next week or so. Except for some restoration and such. And then finally, the Taylor Road project. We had the bid for that on the 23rd. We actually got some really good bids for that. But of course, we're holding off for now to see what the economic impact is and if we want to do that project. Planning to take that and discuss it at the next street committee meeting. Aside from that, happy to answer any questions.
Alan, I wanted to ask about mowing equipment. Last year we had some discussions about certain mowing attachments not working the entire year. We had some major problems with making sure we got all of our rural routes mowed. Have they gone through and looked at all these, making sure everybody works? We're going to hit the ground running with the mowing?
I believe that is true. I'll double check on that.
Okay, thanks.
When do you anticipate starting to mow?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Mayor.
When did you anticipate our first mowing?
It should be very soon. I don't have a specific date.
Okay, all right.
Alan, when do you think we need to have the next street committee meeting?
Probably mid to late May.
So the next council meeting is on the 18th. Kathy, do we have anything else on the 18th
No, we don't.
at this time? Is the 18th sufficient?
The 18th will work, yes.
6 o'clock good enough, or do we need to go earlier than that?
That should be fine.
Do that.
Anything else for Alan? Alan, you still there, Alan?
Yes, sir.
I was happy to see and then obviously when I asked you, you confirmed that taking the dirt from our projects and putting it in areas that, especially like areas like Columbia that have those deep embankments, piping that and putting dirt in it to make it not only easier to maintain but safe for our residents. Thank you. I do appreciate that. That's using all of our, and most of that dirt's coming from the Town Street project, is that correct?
That is correct.
And, Friday when I was talking to the owner of, I think it was Spenco, and we kind of speculated if, what is our savings on us doing the trucking and hauling the dirt and saving the dirt for ourselves versus somebody like Spenco bringing in trucks and backhoes and hauling it out. You remember what he quoted us?
I believe it was between 50 and 100,000.
Okay. And when we have extra dirt now, are we taking it to places like Main Street Garage and Creek and saving it for projects like this?
We're dispersing it in different areas where we are in need, yes.
Okay. And then just a quick follow-up. I've been seeing a lot of utility trucks replacing telephone poles. Is that AEP subcontracting to those people?
Yes.
And do they give us a schedule? Because it seems just random that they just start putting poles up.
They go through the right-of-way permit process. Those are typically good for about 30 days. There's no other schedule provided besides that.
Okay, but you're aware of it, right, when they're doing this stuff?
Yes.
Okay. And the last thing I have is, you know, we talked about those piles of dirt that the companies, the utility companies that are putting in, I don't know if it's fiber optic or what, they're burying all that stuff and they end up with piles of dirt where they're putting those cement pods in for maintenance. Are they coming back to get those piles of dirt? Does that become ours? Do you have an update on that, please?
Yes, I've spoken with Hazen Services, which was the company Harrison Hebner, the company that did Broad Street, specifically there where you're talking about. They've assured me that they will be back, I believe this week, if not next. The other company, I have not received a return from them. However, they do have other right-of-way permits that will be holding until such time as they get that complete.
Very good. Thanks for staying on top of that stuff.
Yes, sir.
Everything else?
Thank you.
Anything for Alan? Scott, are you out there?
Can you see me?
Well,
For better, for worse?
yes, sir, for better or for worse. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to highlight that the Sage Point rezoning, the subdivision located on the corner of Cleveland and Summit, appear before Planning and Zoning Commission on May 6th, which is this Wednesday. Barring a tabling from the Planning and Zoning Commission, it should come with a recommendation to council on May 18th. This is ordinance 2019-4354, and at that time, council has the opportunity to remove it from the table and reconsider the application. Also, we have received revised language from Scenic View Estates. That's the subdivision north of Hazelwood, south and west from Beechwood Trails. I'm currently reviewing that language and hope to have that ready by the next development committee meeting. And also, the development committee is reviewing chapters 1 and 2 of the draft comprehensive plan, so we're moving along with that. Aside from that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anything for Scott?
Yeah, Mayor, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Scott, we had talked earlier this week, or maybe not this week, it would have been last week, about some notices that have been put out for dilapidated properties.
That's correct.
I understand there have been 2 that have been sent out.
That's correct.
Okay. And one of them was based on receiving an anonymous letter or complaint.
Yes, 3 complaints in writing,
Were they all,
but
okay,
no name, none of them.
all 3 anonymous?
Correct.
Okay. And so when that notice was put out, it was just starting the process, correct?
That's correct. Our initial contact, there were 3 stages before mayor's court, so it was the initial contact. We refer to it as door hanger. So knock on the door, give them a phone call. If we can't get a hold of them, then we'll leave that on the door to have them get us a call. So we're at the first stage.
So, I'm sorry, make sure I understand this. So you guys try to call them first before you put a door hanger on?
We try and make initial contact. So we would go knock on the door. If no one's there, we'll leave a door hanger. If we know someone's phone number, we usually try and reach out with them to do it that way as well. So it's just an initial contact with them in person, via phone, via email if we have that information. But if no one's there at the residence or place of business, we place a door hanger on the door.
Okay. And then the complaints or whatever they may be, when you guys establish a notice to that property, does that set a bar of any type of what type of notices need to go out to other properties that may have those similar situations? Does that put the city on notice, city meaning your office, that if that's a dilapidated property, then others that are in similar form or fashion are also dilapidated?
I mean, yeah, we could have Mr. Blake go out and start to look at it, but our plan was to roll this out slowly. Pataxo Square was kind of the impetus behind this, so that was a place we didn't have any real regulations to address the problems that occur there. However, it's in the code, and it's our policy that if we ever receive a complaint and it's something in the code, regardless, we will investigate to determine if there is a justification for that or not. So upon inspection, Mr. Blake determined that the property in question was in violation of the newly distressed properties ordinance.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, I believe I remember this ordinance pretty well, and I don't believe it is driven only by a complaint, whether it be anonymous or not anonymous complaint.
It is not.
I believe
It
it
is
actually
not.
states, well, okay, that's good, that, I agree, it's not. So now that we have received complaints on one property, and we know that that's established a dilapidated form, there are many properties in Pataskala. What is your policy for notifying those properties that they are in that same state?
At this point, I think we add a new element with the COVID and people losing their jobs and how we go about this. And since it's the new section of the code, for right now, we're going to do it complaint-driven only and see how this works out. You're absolutely correct. There's other properties within the city that would violate this ordinance, but we wanted to move slowly and not too quickly so we can get a firm grasp of how this operates and the best way to go about things. So, and this could be said for any other violation of the code, but we're going to go a little bit slowly with this and figure it out as we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Tim, Mayor, do you mind if I continue?
No,
Okay, Tim, I just want to bring this up, that when this ordinance was being put through council, I think you were on council during that time. One of the concerns that I know was brought up was this complaint-driven ordinance or weaponizing, neighbor versus neighbor or whatever, somebody who doesn't like somebody against somebody else. And I'm very concerned that, our second, I guess, situation with this ordinance is an anonymous complaint on a certain property for an outspoken person to the public. And there just doesn't seem to be any other complaints to any other properties, and you can go anywhere in the city, in the old city area, and on any corner or any block, there are houses with tarps on them that have been on for years. There are properties that have needed painted and in far worse condition than possibly even the Pataskala Square, which I know is hard to believe. My concern is twofold. One, we have anonymous complaints, which I know the code doesn't say that they can't be anonymous, so I would like to put that out for discussion at the proper time, to maybe to not allow anonymous complaints. Secondly, we have a situation where now our policy is exactly what I thought we didn't want to have happen when we were passing this ordinance, which is complaint-driven only. My understanding was this ordinance was about the last straw for our zoning inspector, that if he couldn't get any resolution through trying to get in touch with the property owner, this gave the ordinance, this had some teeth in it. Because before that, it did not have teeth in it. So I'm very concerned that our policy at this point is a complaint-driven only ordinance.
Mr. Mayor. Well, I would have one question. Whether or not they're anonymous, are they valid? I mean, who cares if it's anonymous, if it's a valid complaint? I don't see the point in,
Well, I guess the
having to-
answer to that.
And the second is, I heard Mr. Foltz say it's only complaint-driven now, given the current circumstances, that we're not gonna go out and seek out whatever. And finally, I mean, with it being the point of it being a certain person, I mean, there's been complaints that have come in over the years, and we've just not had a code to address anything, over a number of properties across the city. That being one of them, more than once. But, I mean, across the city. So I don't see that when people start realizing that there's a code, that I have a feeling there will be more complaints coming through for other places. It just happens to be, this one, it's come to light.
To address those concerns, I would answer that as, the reason why I'm saying that anonymous complaints seem to be more of a person's neighbor or somebody who is making a complaint for reasons other than necessarily that property or for the good of the city. I would ask why this person who wrote in 3 letters, we assume 3, the same person, right?
It might not have been the same person.
It may not have been, it could have been others, but there are numerous examples. Anywhere you go in the main city, in the old city, numerous examples of dilapidated properties. And
Well, and
so if they're worried, so let me finish, please. So if they're worried about this for the visual effect of the city, I don't understand why they didn't pick 5 different residents or 5 different buildings, because they could have easily. I'm not saying that their complaint wasn't valid. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that there are numerous examples. That's the first thing.
As you said.
Second thing to your point, I don't know that I appreciate Mr. Fulton taking it upon himself to say that this is a complaint driven only for now or for whatever period of time he justifies it as. I don't think that's the way it was written. And actually, in the discussion we had, it was specifically stated that we didn't want it to become this. So it's actually turned into exactly what we didn't want.
We don't know that it has become him coming up that, making that assumption himself. And when it comes to, we don't know that he didn't have that discussion with Mr. Hickey or the previous city. And secondly, when it comes to that particular individual, I'm just gonna say it, we all know it is, and it's a public record, it's Mr. Fox's property, and.
No, it is not.
This
No, it
is,
is not.
oh, it's Mrs. Bernadette Fox's.
This is
property.
Fox. If we're talking about,
Right.
Fox.
But the
Fox,
reason
That's the point.
somebody may want to come in anonymous is because of the actions that are taken against people when they bring up that particular individual. So, I think it actually, if you want to talk about
Okay.
pitting
I think
neighbor
we're-
against neighbor,
We're walking down a very dangerous path, that's all.
Mr. Administrator?
I want to say one thing about Scott. I think we're at a strange or a unique nexus here, where we have asked both council and citizens have asked the zoning department to go look at things in the past. And they were complaint driven for a large portion of, people would say, hey, I can clearly remember people saying, the lights on that place are on for a look, can we please get in touch with them?
Our council.
On council, usually council, but citizens too, and I think that the city would be responsive to those. So we've always been in a complaint-driven system. We just did not necessarily have the means by which to do much. We could do stuff. We were certainly in a complaint-driven system when it came to grass. I think it was both. I think an inspector would drive around and see it, but I know I personally I had neighbors call me as a council person, and I passed it on, and that was the beginning of, that was a complaint-driven situation. So I think that Scott has moved forward. It's almost like a complaint. I think we wanted to roll this out, and Scott, I don't want to speak for you too much, but I think we did want to roll this out slow, and it's almost like a complaint pushed it, because our staff is used to responding to complaints. And when they didn't, we would ask them again, what I asked you last time, why didn't you go talk to the people about the cars? And so I think that their modus operandi has always been to be complaint-driven in some respects. And I think that's probably why you saw that the concept of a complaint comes in, we address it, because that has always been a feeling of the office. Now, should we, I don't know, it's up to council to decide if they wish to modify it to allow anonymous, or not allow anonymous reports. And I would obviously bow to the legislative body.
Mr. President. Well, first of all, in terms of enforcement and law enforcement or code enforcement, I don't see these as complaints, I see them as anonymous tips. That's what we would call them in the true criminal world. There's just somebody saying, hey, something has happened, I want you to go out and take a look at it. So there's nothing wrong with an anonymous tip or an anonymous complaint. The police department gets anonymous tips and complaints all the time. I'm sure some of them bear no fruit and others do. So they go out and they check it out. see, hey, is there something going on here? My neighbor is doing this, I think something's going on in my neighbor's house, or there's some suspicious activity, I don't know what's going on. I see somebody weaving as they're driving down Broad Street. There's all sorts of these anonymous tips, there's nothing wrong with that. It's certainly a legitimate enforcement tool. And, you know, so people are gonna call. There's nothing wrong with people calling in and saying, hey, there's something going on. As to this property that we're talking about, I think we're talking about Bernadette Fox's property on South Main Street, I think is what we're talking about. That's the only one I'm aware of that's had a complaint. There may be others. I don't know if it was 3 people who wrote letters or what they did or emails, or if it was one person 3 times or one person 2 times and another person 1, I don't know. Maybe that's because when they're driving somewhere, they're walking somewhere, they saw it. They don't see other things. I don't think that we have the resources in the zoning department, like the police department, to drive around the Tascala and look for code violations. We've got 1 inspector, so a big city to cover. So, you know, I think that if Steve was out and he saw a code violation, I'm sure he would take appropriate action. So, Mr. Walter, if you know of code violations in the city, you're free to write anonymous. Well, just let me finish. Letters anonymously or not to Mr. Fulton, and you can get out and inspect, or have people get out and inspect and take a look at it. Here's the other thing. If we did that, if we had this stopped complaint-based reporting and went to Mr. Blake driving around an inspection type reporting, you and your supporters would complain about that too. Because the fact of the matter is that you and your supporters don't want zoning, you don't want code enforcement, you want to own your properties and do whatever you want on your property, and the neighbors can gain it.
Well, I appreciate you labeling me and my supporters. I don't know who my supporters are. My point to this is, I got a phone call asking me, and I represent the whole city. So my supporters are whomever in the whole city vote for me. That's my supporter. The same as what you were when you were an at-large councilman. My point being is when I called Scott, I asked him how many of these had been put out. He said 2. I said, well, the second one, this one for this Main Street, what were the purposes? What was the reason? What was the complaint? He said, well, peeling paint and some excavations in the back area. I said, well, Scott, you know, that happens all over the city. And I come back to our discussion that we had in council, and this is about being consistent, and it's also about the discussion we had in council about weaponizing neighbor v. neighbor on a complaint about either their shed not having paint, or the door being broken, or whatever the case may be. And if that's what we're going to do, Scott doesn't have enough people. That's just all there is to it. Scott won't have enough people to put up with to adequately handle all the complaints when one neighbor doesn't like the other neighbor. That's all I'm bringing up here is, and quite frankly, Todd, I don't have enough time to go around inspecting all of Pataskala, nor do I get paid to do that. So I'm not going to go around and cite zoning violations, but I can tell you, in the 5 minutes that it took me to drive around 1 block, I found several.
All right, go ahead and
So what are we asking for? That's what I'm trying to get to
well,
here.
we have a property maintenance code, Mr. Walter, and so if you want to, you can go around and.
I'm just bringing it up, I wanted to bring this up in open discussion so we can understand
I don't recall-
that there's a lot of ramifications to this.
Well, if you're gonna have a property maintenance code, you're gonna have people calling and saying, my neighbor, whatever, garage door is broken or something, whatever, or it's the paint's peeling off the house.
Gutters falling.
Just the same as the police department gets calls about my neighbor's dog is barking and whenever they're playing the music too loud, that's what you have. So, you know, either you have one or you don't, okay? I'll say, my view is I don't think you're in favor of this stuff, but maybe I'm wrong. That just seems to be the tenor of this, is that there is a group of folks here in the city, they have every right, they have every right to feel this way. They want to have their property, and they want to do whatever they want to on their property. They come to council meetings, they speak to me, I hear through them, I see them on Facebook. There's a group of folks, that's how they feel. But we have a property maintenance code. It doesn't apply out in people who have 10 acres. It applies in platted subdivisions and businesses. So that's where it applies. It's not citywide, it's just, that was, we narrowly tailored that. We're not interested in folks who live, up on Summit Road North that have large acreage, and they have a field that they don't cut their field. That's not what we were talking about. I don't want to break it like that. That's not the purpose. These are people who live close together, and it affects not just the aesthetics, it also affects property values, okay? If we have a neighborhood that has properties that aren't well maintained, it affects people's property values. It also, we're talking about economic development, we should know that when a company wants to come here, they send people out to drive around the city. What does it look like, okay? Is this, my people are gonna come here and live? Is this a well-maintained city with well-maintained housing stock? I'm not talking about Granville, I'm just talking about well-maintained housing stock. Modest houses, yards are well-maintained, people take pride in ownership, or is it a pigsty? Is it people have crap in their yards, they don't cut their grass, they let their gutters fall off, all these sorts of things. So, fine, you can't have, I don't think you can have a property maintenance code that isn't complaint driven, because then the neighbor will say, wait a minute, you mean that I'm living in, Sleepy Woods subdivision, and my neighbor, gutters falls off, the siding's coming off, they don't cut the grass, they got a junk car parked there, but I'm banned, because it's not complaint, because we can't have a complaint-driven system, I'm banned, prohibited, from calling the city and saying, hey, this is a problem in my neighborhood.
Right, that's not what I'm saying. So, I
Yes,
must
it is.
misunderstood what I said. My issues were the anonymous complaint, that was the first issue, and second is about being consistent. So once, my question was, and to the zoning department is this going to be a complaint driven only? And apparently for right now it is. Or is it the inspector's job, and as the ordinance is written, that he's supposed to go out there and actually inspect and observe when zoning code is broken? And in this case, all those things you mentioned are all zoning code issues with this ordinance. And apparently he's not going to do that. We're going to wait for complaints to come in. That's all I'm concerned about is, we're not being consistent, and B, now we're going to be complaint driven only. So those are the two concerns
Well,
I
I
have.
mean, certainly, I don't see why we have complaint driven only, but that's the administration that decided to enforce it, just as if the police department might say, we're not going to patrol the streets.
We're not good.
We're just going to
Free
sit
bail.
here, no, we're going to sit here at our nice new police station and wait for 911 calls to come in. And then we're going to go out and take care of the situation, the fight or the drunk driving or whatever it is. That's how we're going to do it. That's not a very good model. I would encourage the administration to have Mr. Blake go out and see, to look around, because it's not the whole city, it's just in certain areas. And I would also encourage the administration to encourage other city departments who are out in neighborhoods doing things, street repair, whatever. If they see a particularly obnoxious instance, probably this time you're going to see grass that's not growing, or they see something that's an obvious problem, there's nothing wrong with them, just contacting Scott, Mr. Blake, and saying, hey, we were patching on the street, and man, this house was, it looked terrible. It really looked awful. Not that they become zoning inspectors, they're not putting door hangers on, they're not citing people. It's just that we saw this. So I would encourage, that part of the city is not. I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge of that part of the city. That's the administrator and the mayor. But I would encourage them to do that because the housing maintenance code, just like our traffic code or our criminal code, is only as good as people who provide information to the city. That's why we have people who say, hey, I think there's somebody in front of me who's intoxicated. They're moving all over the road. I was driving home and I saw a car in the ditch. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to do something about that. We encourage that type of citizen involvement. So I agree with you that it shouldn't be complaint driven only. That's certainly that's a choice. I don't think it's a very good choice.
guess the last thing I would say, or maybe not the last, but I'll just say, I agree with that analogy entirely, that I don't think that's the goal of our department, ultimately. However, in the short term, I think what you see is a result of what has always been. When you get a complaint, the office is trained to go and look at it. I don't, Scott and I really haven't talked a ton about this, but I would envision that absolutely, eventually, when this entire program finds a nice equilibrium, there will be some that are generated by complaint, and there will be some that are generated by observation. And I do think that would be the case.
Scott? Can you hear me, Scott?
Hello?
Yeah, Scott,
Yeah.
listen, you alluded, and I'd like to get an update on Pasco Square Shopping Center, please.
Yeah, we've spoken with them. They're due courtesy letters, which is the next step in the process. Following courtesy letters, they'll have 7 days to correct the issue. If not, we'll post the violation on site and mail it per the code. At that point, they are able to apply for an abatement plan, which is agreed upon between planning and zoning and the applicant or the owner of the property to determine the appropriate time for them to correct the issues on the property, which I know from their discussions has been, they plan on demolishing it. They were having an environmental review done to determine asbestos, etc. And then at that point, we'll move forward with the demolition, hopefully. And to the discussion, as we move forward with this, it's not only complaint-based. None of our zoning enforcement is complaint-based only. And as Mr. Higgins stated, we're rolling this out slowly to get a handle on it and to proceed through this process. Moving forward, we can go out and find properties. I can think of several at the top of my head. We can go out and identify and bring them to the process. But we just want to make sure we're moving through this slowly and deliberately, able to use this section of the code as it is intended. And to the question of weaponizing code enforcement, that happens all the time. That happens all the time, every year, with multiple people. Someone calls about a grass, someone calls about trash. They go back and forth and back and forth. There's no way to get around that. Essentially, Steve will go out and talk to both the neighbors and say, listen, I'm going to write all your violations, and I'm going to write all their violations, and we'll get this all figured out. We're not going back and forth and wasting the taxpayers' money for a neighbor dispute. So it's not my intention for it to be complaint-based only. It's not my intention for Steve not to go out and do this as he's required to do, but we're obligated to the residents that when we get a complaint, anonymous or otherwise, that we follow up on that complaint to determine if it's warranted or not. And to look at the aspect of, for example, we said grass. We can't enforce the grass ordinance because other people have high grass in the city. It's impossible then. We wouldn't enforce grass ordinance. That's going to happen. So just because other people have violated the code doesn't mean that you're not still in violation.
It's not a defense that we didn't prosecute all the bank robbers to my bank robbery. It's not a defense. I can't say, well, if there was a bank robbery and you didn't prosecute anybody, you didn't make any arrests. It's not a defense. So you didn't, speeders. There were 10 other people were speeding on a highway and you only pulled me over. It's not a defense. It's just not. So, all right. But
Hey, Scott, I got one more quick thing for you. There seems to be an uptick.
Yes, sir.
There seems to be an uptick with everybody home. A lot of these charity boxes, dumpsters at apartment complexes, couches, junk, and trash. I know most of them are on private property. I know the one that's sitting at the old Summitown restaurant right now has a couch that somebody obviously wasn't going to donate to a needy family, that just dumped it. What is do we have any teeth in doing anything when it's at a Kroger's or at a private property to entice them to maybe empty them more or do something, but every box in town is trashed. So do we have any teeth there?
And we've run into that multiple times over the years. Typically what we'll do is contact the property owner and or if there's contact information on the box, we'll get in touch with them to try and get it resolved.
Okay, well, check them out for me, would you?
Yes, sir.
A shout out to this, to Mariah Moore's teenage sons who went and picked up the one there, was it at the Kroger, I think?
Yep.
I think they came and they picked up, I mean, they couldn't throw anything away, but I think they bagged the trash and kind of fixed it up as best they could, so I forgot that, shout out to her.
And since we're talking about planning and zoning, I want to thank Chief Brooks and Administrator Mr. Hicken, and of course Scott, for working with the Dairy Hut. That was, during this time, that was a much-needed shot in the arm for many residents. So thanks for working with them to make that possible. Scott? Did you hear me, Scott?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for helping us with the Dairy Hut situation.
Yes.
Anything else for Scott? Thank you, sir. Lanier?
Lanier, you're muted. There you go.
First thing I'd like to highlight, we've officially started our Fitness in the Park Challenge and other programs that I guess we're not really encouraging folks to the park, but we actually encouraging them to use our outdoor open spaces and also our walking path along Taylor Road and also Conway's Trail. By the end of the week, we will have the signs out, and most of those signs are going to basically state practice social distancing during the COVID times, and also taking selfies after they have completed their workouts. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that we've seen in the parks. And I firsthand, some families have brought their children to the park, and they have all helped out and chipped in with picking up trash. Some of them even asked for bags, and I really want to thank those residents who are going to the park, not only for their enjoyment, but they're also seeing that being good stewards is also a good community as well. I'm not sure if you all have seen our Pataskala Pataskala Park Facebook page, but if you haven't, as of 9 a.m. this morning, we'll roll out a 30-day trial for our new activity program. This trial is basically going to get a feel for how the community engages with me and also the YMCA via this mobile application as we lead towards our active living everyday program, which is set to start on June. As a reminder, active living everyday program was made available by our, National Recreation and Parks Association grant that we received late last year. So we're looking forward to this application, this community engagement, as we lead to our new program to reach a different demographic. Next thing on my list, I'd like to discuss Liberty Park. It's been 2 years in the making. We finally got to the contract process, so hopefully by the end of this week, we will have the contract documents sent out to both state. After discussing with the contractor, we are anticipating starting this project on May 15th. So Taylor Glenn, the resident from the west side of town, will begin to start seeing, some mobilizations of some equipment moving in there prior to our next meeting. So I am looking forward to this project. And as a reminder, this project will be our grant, $68,000 or a little bit more than $68,000 will be reimbursed at the completion of this project. The amenities that will go in there are a shelter house, an extended parking lot, there will be a walking path around the open field, along with some nature play units installed inside of the space. So that project is beginning May 15th. And lastly, through COVID, as we've been discussing, we've been trying to figure out what we are focusing on, and also the recreation fund. After, plenty of conversations with the administration, and more so Mr. Hicken, and also Jamie and some of the other directors. We are still pondering and moving forward, the pool process. We interviewed two strong applicants for the manager's positions. We are not offering those positions at all, as I stated, we're just going preliminary process for those two, just in case, see if we will move forward with it. As of this week, I will be picking up some, items that are necessary for our pool renovations. There are some chips in the paint, so we have to go, start painting it, most likely starting most likely on Wednesday, in hopes that we'll be filling the pool and check for any leaks, next week. I do have people who come next Wednesday to help me with that process. Tomorrow, we'll be discussing the pool, at our advisory board meeting. Nothing is final at this time. I'm hoping you utilize this month to develop, guidance, not only from our Parks Advisory Board, but also from administration of NSO Council. But at this time, we are still in the movie game. And aside from that, I'm open to any questions.
Anything for Lanier? Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Keep us posted on the pool.
Will do.
Any questions that you want me to pass on to Chief Brooks?
I just want to thank the chief publicly for handling a situation in my ward. This was a trespassing issue. The officers handled it very well. We had a charge that had to be filed, and the situation appears to be abated. So at least at this point is what I hear from everyone involved. So thanks to the chief. I did shot a text, but I wanted to say publicly appreciate that, the way the department handled that. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Committee chair reports. Any? Go ahead, sir.
Does anybody have a report?
I did.
Okay, go ahead.
I am reporting in lieu of Mr. Lee, who is the Development Committee Chair. I would invite anybody that was at the meeting to jump on in here if they wish, if they so desire. And that includes you too, Scott. I don't know if you can hear me, but maybe not. So we had a development committee on April 23rd. The main focus of it was to go over some comments and review aspects of the comprehensive plan. It did start off with a very brief scenic view, talk about scenic view from Scott. Basically, I think we're making sure that they have everything right based on what was told to the developers. And we're waiting on the developers to come back with those changes so that council, and I think it's at BZA. Anyway, maybe it's back to planning and zoning. But it'll wind its course through and eventually come back to council. We then moved on to a pretty in-depth discussion of the changes to the proposed comprehensive plan. We discussed in great detail whether the document was a guide or policy. We saw, I think consensus of the group was that it was a guide, although in aspects or sometimes it seemed to read or indicate that it itself was policy. And I think that the people there were anxious to possibly see some changes to make the entire document be more of a guide. I think if Tommy was here, one of the things that he would want to ask council present is, do you agree with that? I think we were looking in some respects at a wholesale rewrite of the comprehensive plan as it's been presented. If council does not take that tack in addressing the comprehensive plan. So if you want to, ultimately, I think the people that were there came to a meeting, and I certainly was one of them, that indeed we are looking at it as a guidance, and we're beginning to look at section 1. Another question that came out of that meeting is, of course, we have a contract in place with OHM, and our slated plan, what we came up with was changes to the comprehensive plan would be compiled by the Economic Development Committee and by the Development Committee. And those changes would be delivered en masse to OHL instead of having changes sent and, okay, we've changed this portion of the document, and then here's some more. And they send it back to council, and here's some more. So I think the goal was to make sure that council is okay if they see the final product, the final revisions, based on your own input, of course, because council has been asked to give input on all sections. And we'll look at the next development committee to set up. The next development committee will probably take place next week or the following week. Tom's not sure. The intent was, I think, I'm trying to think what my note here says. Let me read it. Ultimately, the section 1 is going to be done that time, and we would begin to tackle section 2. I would also make one other suggestion, and I hope I get it right. It is section 4, which I think is probably the more in-depth and possibly contentious section, which is the land use map. I think we have begun to look at accepting a wide variety of interactive mapping type activities to go with that section 4. So not only would there be a land use section, but there might be all of the utilities sections that could be used by a developer or somebody looking at it, or soil types, or whatever we have. If if a council member has something they would like to include in there, please submit it. Please give it to Tommy Lee or Scott, who is also compiling all the changes. And that goes for the directors as well. And I don't know, these notes were written afterwards. I apologize to Tom. I think, Andy?
Yeah, you've hit highlights, absolutely.
I took some notes on the piece of paper that night, but I wasn't taking notes to be able to give this update, so I offer my apologies.
I think Tommy was going to ask for comments on 3 and 4, or just 3, or whatever the next section was, comments on that. I think that's what he was.
And that would be 3.
Yeah,
Because I
3.
think 1 and 2 we supposedly already have comments for.
Yeah.
I would just tell all of council, if you have comments on 1, 2, or 3,
Right.
there's still enough time, get them in. And I think the development committee has taken the task of overseeing Scott's compiling of all those changes.
Anything else? Any other committee chair reports? Would you like to set up a committee?
Yes, HR committee needs to schedule a meeting to figure out how we're going to handle evaluations for this year. It's going to be a little strange because we have new council members and new city administrator, so we'll have to figure that out. So Kathy, that's myself, Ms. Carter, Ms. Hampshire, HR committee, so I'll get an email out to all of us, including you, and get some times to discuss that, so. Okay, cool, all right, thank you.
Mayor, do you want us to set up committee meetings now, or do you want us to wait till the end? Do you care?
We can just.
Okay, well, Chris, if you don't mind, Chris asked me to see if we can set up a utility committee meeting either later this week or next. And I think that's Kyle, Justin, and myself. Is there, Chris threw out this Thursday and Friday, I think. I'm sorry, this Wednesday or Thursday, or any day next week. And I would have to concur that I could do either Wednesday or Thursday, or pretty much any day next week. I'm going to say, Chris, are you listening? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Were you targeting, say, 5 o'clock or 5:30?
Yeah, I think that works out good, but I'm pretty flexible, so.
Okay.
What days?
So either Wednesday or Thursday of this week,
Yeah,
or
5 o'clock's fine.
5 o'clock's okay?
I mean, that's fine, that's
5
fine.
o'clock's okay with me. You okay with it?
Just, not that I'm really ever involved in committees, but there is the Sidewalk Assessment Evaluation Committee also at 5 o'clock on Wednesday. I don't know if that makes any difference, but
Thank you. I was just,
I was there, so.
so would Thursday be okay? Would be a, adequate alternative? I would also add that, there's also, a zoning committee meeting after that 5 o'clock Wednesday. So, if.
Let's do the 5 o'clock on Thursday, if that's possible. Chris, you okay with that?
Yes, sir, that works for me.
That's the 7th, right?
7th.
All set, Kathy? You're in good shape?
Yep. All I need is the purpose, if someone will email
I'll
it.
get that Kathy tomorrow.
Chris has that.
Chris will send the purpose to Kathy.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, any other committee chair issues, stuff, reports, meetings? All right, here we go, unfinished business. We got two that are staying on the table. Ordinance 2020-4364 for a second reading. Moved by Mrs. Carter,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Epperson. Kathy, when you're ready, second reading, please.
Ordinance 2020-4364, this is the second reading, an ordinance to create and establish compensation for a new part-time position of employment, Mayor's Court Bailiff, within the city of Pataskla, and to amend the 2020-2022 pay matrix for non-collectively bargained employees for the city of Pataskla, effective for the pay period beginning on and after January 12th, 2020.
Discussion? Okay, ordinance 2020-4365 for a second reading. Moved by Mrs. Carter,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Walter. Kathy, when you're ready.
Ordinance 2020-4365, this is the second reading, an ordinance creating and establishing the position of Economic Development Director.
Discussion? Okay, on the resolutions, resolution 2020-040, resolution authorizing and directing the city administrator to enter into a contract with Kirk Brothers Company, Inc. for construction services for the water reclamation facility, WRF, phosphorus reduction improvement project.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Barstow. Seconded by Mr. Epperson. Discussion and roll.
Barstow,
Yes.
Hampshire,
Yes.
Gaelic,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Epperson.
Yes.
Resolution passes. Resolution 2020-041, a resolution authorizing and directing the city administrator to enter into an agreement with the Licking County Health Department for citywide mosquito treatment for the calendar year 2020.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Barstow,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Carter. Discussion and roll.
Hampshire,
Yes.
Gaelic,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Epperson,
Yes.
Barstow.
Yes.
Look out mosquitoes. Resolution passes. On to motions. Any motions? What do you got for me, Mr. Barstow?
Well, additional citizens' comments, I don't see, there's not too many people watching, I think Mr. Powell was watching, he only watched for a few minutes, and then something much more exciting must have popped up there.
Dairy Hut. Dairy
He
Hut.
probably did, he's a smart guy.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I move we go to executive session pursuant to revised code section 121.22G3 to conference with an attorney for the city of Pataskla concerning a dispute involving the city that is the subject of a pending court action. Invited into executive session are Tim Hicken and Brian Zetz.
Got a motion for executive session,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Walter. Discussion and roll.
Gaelic,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Epperson,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes.
Hampshire.
Yes.
Okay, executive session at 8:15. We'll be back.
My apologies, I was not quite ready.
motion to come out of executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Barstow, seconded by Mrs. Carter. Kathy, when you're ready, please.
Gaelic,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes?
Epperson,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes.
Hampshire.
Yes.
Okay, out of executive session at 8:35. We'll just go around the room like we normally do. We'll start with Mrs. Carter.
You know, the last time we met, I didn't get to properly thank Chris. You weren't in here either, but I think you really did an outstanding job.
Thank you, I
And
appreciate that.
it's, kind of unexpectedly had to step into that in weird times on top of everything else. So I just want to say that we handled things very, very well, and I'm super appreciative.
Thank you. It was, the work of the staff, it was easy to do with the crew that we have, so, but I appreciate
We had a
it.
good staff, so
We do.
the chief, that was, you did well under pressure.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Cue the song Under Pressure. Mr. Barstow?
I echo those same comments. Chris, you came in at a very short notice, and then we had the coronavirus and all the other things that go on in the city, and you handled it really, really well, and just did a fantastic job. Couldn't be happier, and left things a smooth transition for Mr. Hicken. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir, appreciate it.
Mr. Hicken, you got anything for us? Jude?
Nothing really that I can think of other than my youngest son is heading straight down the legal pathway these days, and in lieu of things that are going on right now, his fundraising might be a bit unorthodox, so we'll see where it gets us.
Brandon?
I'm glad the polls on Main Street are finally down, and it's been a project been making for you guys, so it's good to see those have finally been finished, and as the mayor said earlier, I want to thank Alan too for using that filter with good respect to the city and what it should be used for. So.
I just want to wish you a happy 18th birthday.
Well, thank you. Not quite.
Two things, I guess. One, I wanted to say that out of all the years that I have been here at council, today was the first day that I received a call from our city administrator asking me about that evening's council meeting. And I just want to say, you know what, that's great. I'm looking forward to working with you, Tim. You know, that says a lot right there. So, and Chris, obviously, that didn't include you. You had enough between the utilities and the city administration. I'm looking forward to having you back in utilities solely.
I'm looking forward to being back.
Thanks.
Mr. Zets? Nothing. You're all talked out?
If I could make a motion, I would, but, I can't.
Oh, I get you, kid. Okay. Mr. Epperson?
I'd like to thank Mr. Higgin. I had a Main Street resident just ask me about the yards and maintaining the yards, and it wasn't 24 hours later, I got your email, so you already answered my questions before I asked them, so that was fantastic. Thank you for that. And I motion we adjourn.
And before we do that, I just want to echo Mr. Hicken. I appreciate your, the first 2 weeks, he was there at 8:01 because he punches in, you know, so he comes upstairs and he's in the office at 8:01, and I'm having some great conversations with him, and the city is running very smoothly. Thank you, sir. You have a motion to adjourn. I need a second.
I already did that.
Okay.
Yes,
Parliamentary. Third by Mr. Zets. Go ahead, Kathy.
Carter,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Epperson,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes.
Hampshire,
Yes.
Gaelic.
Yes.
Motion, hey, meeting adjourned.
You say that.